While your league mates are sleeping through the offseason, right now is a great time to take advantage of some undervalued dynasty assets. I'm going to break it all down here today on First Read Fantasy.
To me, it's looking counterfeit. I get done with one, then move right on to another bitch. Yeah, college educated, she graduated.
So, Alvin Kamara is going to be the first player we talk about today. He was RB9 in 2024. This is a guy who's 29 years old, is turning 30, in the beginning of the season. And currently, Alvin Kamara is RB23 in startup ADP, and he's going at pick 86. I feel like he's really, really strong value when you look at some of the guys that are going around him and the production that we've gotten from Alvin Kamara. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're trading for Alvin Kamara in Dynasty specifically, this is a win now contending move. You have to assess your lineup and know if you are truly a contender. I would not advocate for making a move for Alvin Kamara if you are not in a contention window. But when you look at the numbers from Alvin Kamara, over the last two seasons, this is a guy who has back-to-back seasons of top 5 points per game play. And it feels like it's gone unnoticed, right? Because of the age and because everyone has just assumed that Alvin Kamara is going to fall off because of the age. But I think it speaks volumes when you look at the fact that this organization extended Alvin Kamara in the middle of last season with a 2-year, $20 million contract extension. And I think they're going to continue to feature him as the focal point in this offense. The New Orleans Saints, everybody is a little nervous to own assets because if it's Chris Olave, you're worried about the concussions, right? If it's Raheed Shaheed, he's coming off of the injury. And then it's really just Alvin Kamara, right? Who has been Mr. Reliable. As I said, he's a guy that's been top 5 in points per game in back-to-back seasons at the running back position. But people are afraid of, is this team hitting a rebuild? How bad will this team be? Well, we saw them be really, really bad with awful quarterback play last season, and Kamara was still fifth in points per game. And so if you're a contender, I'm buying Alvin Kamara right now. His cost is really cheap. We'll go over some of the trades that he has been moved for per some data that I pulled, but he's had one season in his entire career of under 57 receptions. So that floor is already extremely high for Alvin Kamara. Not to mention, Kellen Moore now steps into this offense, and we've seen Kellen Moore target the running back position very frequently in his time as offensive coordinators with other teams. Now, he is the head coach, but it's going to be his offense. We saw Saquon Barkley, who people were very afraid of if he's going to catch the football. He had no issue doing that. We saw Ezekiel Elliott with his time with the Cowboys, right? We have seen Kellen Moore be successful and throw to the running back position very frequently, and I don't expect that to change now with Alvin Kamara this season. As I stated, he's 29, turning 30 years old. He's averaging 71 receptions in the last two seasons. That's at the top of the NFL. And I think maybe the concern with the age is explosiveness and and injury concerns, but this is a guy in Alvin Kamara, 15th in breakaway run rate last season and was 8th in explosive rating per pro player profiler. So you can go check that data, but it's there and readily available and free for anybody to use on Player Profiler. And again, Calvin Kamara going to be a focal point in this offense. They did not add to this room, which I think is telling as well. It's Cam Akers who they added, this week, which I'm not overly concerned about. It's not a very strong veteran to add to the room. You have Kendre Miller, who is a guy that people have had high expectations for years, and he hasn't hit that mark. Then you also have late round pick in Devin Neal, who I really liked coming out of college, and I think is a value in in rookie drafts and in dynasty startups. But None of these guys are challenging Alvin Kamara for the starting role, and I don't think they're going to eat into his touches either. They're going to ride Alvin Kamara until the wheels fall off, and he continues to be a value. When you look at some of the trades that he's been involved in as of lately, you see up here in the top left, Alvin Kamara and Deebo Samuel for Tank Dell, a 209 rookie pick in 2025, and then a third round pick in 2026 from a rookie standpoint. Then you see him get traded for a third and a fourth round pick in this year's rookie draft, 2 second rounders in 2026, another second in 2027, and a third in 2026. I mean, these are really, really cheap costs for Alvin Kamara. And I really wouldn't have an issue trading a second and a third for Alvin Kamara if you are a contender and you need the help at the running back position. It is very hard to acquire top end running backs in Dynasty. And quite honestly, Alvin Kamara has been a top end running back. It's just about the age and the fall off. And we know that he's a aging dynasty asset, but he's still a strong value. If you are contending, I think a second round pick is a fair price to pay. And a third round pick on top, maybe in 2027, I'm fine with that as well. But let's go ahead and move on to the next player. It's going to be Tucker Kraft, tight end for the Green Bay Packers. Right now, Tucker Kraft is going as the tight end 10 in startup ADP, pick 104 off the board. And in 2024, he was tight end 10 in total fantasy points. And I think when you look at this offense for the Packers, there is not a ton of target hogs, if not any target hogs in this offense. You have Matthew Golden, first round pick, who I have good expectations for. I think he can be a very good NFL player and a big play waiting to happen, but he's not going to be a guy, in my opinion, who is going to dominate the target share where he's getting you 8 to 9 targets a game. Then you have Jaden Reed, who is a gadgety player. He's a guy that needs manufactured touches in many such cases, right? Then you have Romeo Dobbs, who is a chain mover in his own right, a good NFL player, but not a number two. And then you have Dontavian Wicks and Savion Williams, who Williams is a rookie, and then Wicks obviously, has his issues with the drops, which many of these receivers have. Then you look at Tucker Kraft, who was a good, reliable target for Jordan Love last year. Tucker Kraft, fourth in total touchdowns for tight ends last year. He had a total of 7. He was seventh in receiving yards last year, which was good enough for 707 yards. And that was just on 18th. I'm sorry, that was good enough for being 18th in total targets and 18th in total receptions with 70 and 50 respectfully. So when you look at the fact that this is a guy who had a really, really strong production on not an insane amount of targets, they want to get this guy involved this year. That is what I am putting my flag on. This is not an aging asset either. So this is not just a win now move. This is a win now move and a future move for a rebuilding team as well. He can be considered both right now. And recently Jordan Love came out and said, in quote, a big part of what's going into this season is finding ways to continue to get Tucker Kraft the football, get him as many touches as we can in a game. He's a dynamic playmaker, and that's going to be a focus. I know there's a lot of smoke and mirrors this time of year, but I truly believe Tucker Kraft will be a focus. There are not a ton of red zone targets in this offense. When you look at it, it's really Josh Jacobs on the ground and then maybe some manufactured touches for Jaden Reed, some schemed up plays for Matthew Golden. But Christian Watson was a big guy in this offense when it came to targets in the red zone. He had 8 last year and, he's no longer available. Tucker Kraft was a strong red zone target last year. He had 13 targets last year and, that was good enough for 12th of all tight ends. I expect him to be the number one passing target in this offense. And this is a strong athlete, right? 4.69 40-yard dash. He's a strong athlete with good yards after catch ability. And I would be willing to give up a mid second round pick for Tucker Kraft. In many such cases, when you look at some of the trades that I would, I tried to pull some good trades on the screen, but not everything was clumped together. So I'm just going to throw some out there. Cooper Cup for Tucker Kraft. I'd be willing to move that if you have Cup on your team and you need a tight end for the future and for now. If you have Dalton Kincaid, I'd be willing to quote unquote tear down from Kincaid and get Kraft and maybe a 2027 second round pick added on top, or a 2026 third round pick added, right? David Montgomery, who I love, right? I'm worried that he's getting to a point where he's starting to age. And if you have the expendability at the running back position, you move maybe David Montgomery for Kraft and a 2026 second round pick, right? These are very doable moves just based on where he's currently going in startups and where people currently have him valued. So go out there, send an offer for Tucker Kraft, especially if you're a team that needs help at the tight end position. Our next player we're going to talk about is going to be Calvin Ridley, wide receiver for the Tennessee Titans. This is a guy who's wide receiver 52 in startups right now and has a 132 total ADP. And if you're not familiar with ADP, it's average draft position in startups. This is a contender move. This is a win now move for Calvin Ridley. He's 30 years old, but not a ton of tread on the tires when you think about Calvin Ridley and you think about a 30-year-old player. You think, yeah, a lot of wear and tear, but we have to remember this is a guy who, in 2021 played just 5 games. And he then had the suspension in 2022, right? So he had some time off. Since he came back, he's played 17 games in back-to-back seasons, and he's had back-to-back years with 1,000 receiving yards. Now, he had some bad quarterback play last year. You had Will Levis. Now you inject Cam Ward, who is a rookie. He's going to go through his struggles and growing pains, but I can't imagine that he's not going to be an upgrade over what Calvin Ridley had throwing him the football last season, and Will Levis and sometimes even Mason Rudolph. But last year and actually in back-to-back years, he's had 1,700 plus air yards, right? So that's where the ball is physically traveled in the air on passes thrown to him, 1,700 in back-to-back seasons. And he was 10th in yards per catch last year with 15.9. There's no established number two in this offense. You have Tyler Lockett, you have Van Jefferson, you have Alec Ayumanner, and you have Chimere DK, who is a rookie wide receiver, and then Xavier Restrepo, who maybe he makes a team, but it sounds like he was undrafted, but I think he's going to make the team. He has the connection with Cam Ward. It sounds like things have gone pretty solid with them and their connections there, so far in this offseason. And then you have Treylon Burks, who, I mean, if you're still holding out hope for Treylon Burks, I don't know what to tell you, right? I'd be happy to be wrong if Treylon Burks just has a breakout this year and surprises people. I'm happy to be wrong, but regardless, there is no established number two in this offense. And so, reading some recent reports, Ridley and Cam Ward's connection has looked strong. It seems like the two are getting along very well. Both of their lockers are next to each other. And Calvin Ridley recently said, you need a quarterback at the position that's not going to be an overthinker, a jittery guy. You just got to be a guy that can just say, just be okay with fucking up, and just have that fuck it mentality. And he's kind of good at that, is what Calvin Ridley said. And so Cam Ward is a guy who is willing to take some chances throwing the football. And that bodes well for a guy like Calvin Ridley, because the reason he had, those strong yards per catch is because he had a strong ADOT as well for the depth of targets in the offense last year with guys like Will Levis who were not afraid to put the ball in harm's way. I'm not saying Cam Ward is going to put the ball in harm's way, but he's a guy that does not mind taking some chances. And I think that's a good way to put it. And that's why I think Calvin Ridley can sustain, those 1,000-yard seasons that he's had back to back. I can't imagine him not taking a step forward unless there's an injury that ends up happening to him. Again, he's 30 years old, but again, has played in 17 games back to back in the last 2 seasons. some trade ideas that I had for him, maybe you have Xavier Legette and, you trade him for Calvin Ridley and a 2026 third round pick. I'm not super high on Xavier Legette right now. Legette goes ahead a round or two of Calvin Ridley in startups currently at the moment, which is why I think there's a very strong possibility you could tear down from Xavier Legette to Calvin Ridley. And then Debo Samuel, right? Debo Samuel goes pretty close to where Calvin Ridley's being drafted, but this is just a case of, what are people buying into right now? Are people excited about Debo Samuel, going to the Commanders? And if so, I'm not excited about it, right? I think Debo Samuel could easily be moved, for Calvin Ridley and maybe a third round pick in 2026. But I'd be comfortable as a contender doing that deal straight up. I wouldn't need that extra pick, though I always try to get third round picks added on top, but your league mates best. I try not to, mess around with that too much. If I know a guy's just going to get pissed if you're nickel and diming, sometimes you just got to get a deal done. And I would be fine doing that deal straight up. Our next player on this list that we're going to talk about is a guy that people are probably going to be surprised about. It's Rachaad White, running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And listen, I think the hate for Rachaad White has gone way too far. I was a guy that was not heavily in on him. I really liked Bucky Irving last year. If you go back to our archives when we were with Face Off Sports Network, like if you check me out on Twitter, like I was not excited about Rachaad White, and I was very much in on Bucky Irving because Rachaad White wasn't very efficient, right, in 2023 before Bucky came back. But I mean, this is a room that likes to feature multiple running backs, regardless of how good Bucky Irving looked. He's also a running back that's a little bit small, undersized. There's concerns there for me about, injuries, right? He was banged up a little bit last year. I love Bucky Irving. I will be the first person to tell you that I was very much in on him last year, and I owned him in a lot of dynasty startups and rookie drafts and redraft as well. I pretty much owned him everywhere. But with Rachaad White, he was the RB22 in 2024, which is pretty solid considering how good of a year Bucky Irving had. And I think this is a very, very good depth move. This is not going to be a guy that you're like, oh, he's going to put you over the top. But sometimes you don't have to always make trades and look at it and say, this guy is going to be this explosive, has extremely high upside. I'm not going to sell you on Rachaad White having a crazy high ceiling, though he did finish in the top 10 for points per game the year before Bucky Irving was there. So he has shown that he can, handle a strong workload, and this offense can feature a lot of passes to the running back position, and Rachaad White took advantage of that. And even when Bucky Irving came back, came in this season, Rachaad White still had more targets and more receptions. Now, it took Bucky Irving some time to get ingratiated into the offense and make an impact. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Rachaad White's going to be RB1 in the offense. He's not, but you need depth moves sometimes, especially as contenders. Running backs are hard to acquire. And this is a guy that's not very old. He's 26, right? Like, this is a guy that you could trade for. Maybe he doesn't come back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Maybe he goes on elsewhere and, maybe finds himself in a chance to maybe compete for a starting role. I don't think he's going to compete for the starting role here. But the benefit that we have with Rachaad White is the receiving upside, which gives him a very strong floor. As I said, 57 targets last year, 51 receptions. Bucky had 52 targets last year, 47 receptions. And this is a Buccaneers team that was 10th in passing attempts per game last year. Baker Mayfield loves to check the football down. Now, they did add some weapons in this offense with Igbuka in the passing game, first round pick, but I still expect them to feature the running backs in this offense. Again, this is a very bad defense too. The Buccaneers did not take a big step forward on defense, so I expect them to be in passing down situations in higher scoring games. And when you look at Rachaad White, he can also find the end zone. He's had back-to-back seasons with 9 touchdowns. So there's a good floor there. He scores touchdowns and he has a good floor when it comes to receiving work. So when you also take a look, third most routes run at the running back position in the entire NFL in 2024, even with Bucky Irving there, he ran 303 routes, 18.9 routes run per game. That is a very high number. He was in there on third down more than Bucky Irving. Again, people will probably look and say, hey, Bucky Irving took some time to ingratiate himself in the offense. Totally get that. And that's a fair thing to say. But overall, Rachaad White, a very, very good depth move to make. Send a 2026 third round pick to somebody for him. For Rachaad White. Send a 2026 third round pick for Rachaad White and see if you can get somebody to bite on that. I think it's very, very possible that someone's willing to move him if they have the depth, or maybe they're a rebuilder and they like, I don't need Rachaad White. Like that is very possible. And if not, maybe you send over another player that you're not really in love with, right? And maybe add a third round pick to it, right? Like I'm fine with that too. I think a third round pick should be able to get it done in 2026 for Rachaad White. Just depends on your league mates and how people value him. But the hype for Bucky Irving is extremely strong. This is a guy that even in redraft right now, going in the top 2 rounds, right? A very, very expensive dynasty asset at the moment. And that is likely having people sour on Rachaad White. And I totally understand that, right? And so take advantage of those dynasty owners and managers that are kind of sick of that situation. The last guy we're going to talk about today is going to be tight end Evan Engram of the Denver Broncos. This is a guy that right now is going as tight end 17, pick 135 in startup ADP. Evan Engram finds himself in Denver, and this is arguably, I don't even think it's arguable. It's the best situation he has ever had. When you look at the numbers for Evan Engram, he's one of 5 tight ends to average 90 plus targets over the last 3 seasons. Kelsey, Hawkinson, Njoku, and Kittle are the other tight ends on that list. So some really favorable company. And Engram ranks third in that entire list. He is a guy that no matter where he's been, he has been able to, demand the football. He's a very athletic tight end, and there's low target competition in Denver right now. You have Cortland Sutton. They obviously love to throw the running back, the football to the running back position. So I expect targets to go there. And then it's Marvin Mims, Pat Bryant, Devon Vele, right? And Troy Franklin. And that tight end room is very bad. It's Lucas Kroll and it's a couple other, misfits. It's not really deep. That the tight end room is awful, to be completely honest with you, behind Evan Engram. And so I'm putting my flag down on him now. He's going to be the second target earner in this offense. He's going to be second most targets behind Cortland Sutton in this offense. And I'll take that at a tight end position for a guy that's going as the tight end 17 right now in dynasty startups, like pick 135. So it depends who you're going to, and again, league mates and how they value people matters. But if you need a tight end and you're a contender, this is a guy that's an easy buy for me. Like, go out and get Evan Engram. Sean Payton sold him on his fit in this offense. It was between Denver and it was between the Los Angeles Chargers, and he picked Denver. And the reports were they were pretty much identical contract offers, and he chose Denver. And I think it speaks volumes, right? He tweeted out a picture of the Joker right after he signed with Denver. And if you're familiar with Sean Payton, he always talks about this Joker, right? This mismatch in his offense. And clearly he sold Evan Engram on the fact that he thinks he's going to be his Joker in this offense, creating mismatches. And he probably wasn't sold on his role of what it would be with the Chargers, right? So I expect him to be utilized very, very well in this offense with Sean Payton. And when you look at him, it's really just age, right? 30 years old, age and health. But at 30 years old for a tight end, that is not that old, to be honest. Tight ends are one of those positions that these guys stay around for a pretty long time. And you can easily get 2 to 3 years out of Evan Engram, at least 2 really strong years out of Evan Engram, in my opinion, as long as he's with Denver. And he's, from a health standpoint, he's had some issues earlier on in his career. He obviously only played 9 games last year, but overall, he had 4 straight seasons where he played 15 or more games from 2020 to 2023. And then he had the season last year where he dealt with injuries and only played in 9 games. So he has been healthy, right, in the last 5 seasons. Guys are going to miss a game or two here and there, but if playing only missing no more than 2 games per season, and in a stretch of 2020 to 2023, 4 years is pretty good. And for what you're paying for him, I think it makes a ton of sense to go out and purchase Evan Engram in Dynasty. Right now, I would be willing to send a second round pick for him as well. If you are contending at maybe a 2026 second, or I would start with a 2027 second round pick and work from there and try to maybe move to a 2026 if you have to. But guys like Dallas Goddard, I've seen go, in trades to, for Evan Ingram in a third, right? Maybe Jonnu Smith. You can probably tear down from Jonnu Smith depending on who the owner is. Jonnu for Evan Ingram in a second is not that crazy. Where Jonnu is currently going in startups and where he's valued, like that is a very real thing. Maybe it's Jonnu in a third for Evan Ingram in a 2026 second round pick. That is very much doable. But that's going to do it for us, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, like and subscribe to the show and the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.
Me is looking counterfeit. I get done with one, then move right on to another bitch. Yeah. College education.